What's going on, guys? My name is Steve. Thank you for stopping by my channel. I'm just an American guy on a journey to discover my British and Irish ancestry. Today, we're going to be reacting to every country England has invaded, visualized. I can't begin to tell you how many times people have recommended I check out this topic. I've had it on the list of things I want to check out, and I just haven't got around to it until now. But I definitely look forward to kind of understanding on a deeper level just how many countries England invaded throughout the years. You know, I know this number has to be pretty large considering how great the British Empire was at one point, how far it expanded, and just how influential England specifically has been on the world in general. You know, and I think about all the Commonwealth countries of today, and I wonder how many of those were possibly invaded at one point by England. I don't know. I really don't. I don't have a clue what to expect here, but I do expect the numbers to be on up there, to say the least. So anyways, guys, let's go ahead and check out every country England has invaded visualized.
This video is made possible by CuriosityStream. Watch all of my videos early and ad-free, or watch my upcoming original series exclusively on Nebula, which you can get access to for $15 a year through the bundled deal at curiositystream.com/reallifelore. For a good chunk of the past few centuries, this music was the final boss music played for people across the entire world. The English and later the British have been responsible for invading and conquering more countries and people than any other nation in human history. And honestly...
Wow, are you serious? More than the Roman Empire? Wow. You know, I don't know how many, nations the Roman Empire invaded, but I just expected that to be higher than England. But wow, that's crazy.
It's startling just how many places they've been to. In this video, I'm going to do my best at attempting to visualize all of Britain's invasions and conquests for you, continent by continent, in as brief a time as possible. So let's begin with the closest continent to Britain, Europe. Ireland was the first target of British conquests and was invaded as early as 1169. Within 400 years of gradual conquests, the entire island was ruled by the British and remained that way until most of it was granted independence in 1921. Historically, France has probably been invaded by the English more times than any other country in the world.
Really?
Just take a look at this huge...
Wow. Wow. Wait, so actually it looks like France was invaded before Ireland was, actually. That's interesting. I thought Ireland, I think he even said it was the first. Maybe I'm missing something there, but some context I'm missing, I think. But wow, that is insane.
List of invasions. There's not even enough time to talk about a third of these, and for a time, all of this territory inside of modern France was directly controlled by the English, with Calais being the final piece that fell in 1557. Well, except for that time when the British took over Corsica for a couple years. The British continue to invade Spain by the millions every winter, but in the past, they've come with a lot less friendly intentions. English and later British soldiers invaded under the Black Prince in 1367, and continued on through the first, second, third, and fourth raids on Cadiz, and that time when the British took over Gibraltar and Minorca. They gave Minorca back, but decided on keeping Gibraltar forever. In recent history, the British have invaded Belgium in order to support the Belgians, but that wasn't always the case. They conducted two pretty large-scale invasions of modern-day Belgium in 1654, and again...
Wow, I quickly wanted to ask, is Gibraltar, is that part of England or part of the UK in general? For some reason, I believe it is. I think someone's told me I need to look into that. Please let me know in the comments. Is Gibraltar a part of the UK currently?
Again in 1701, and Flanders itself was ruled by the English for a few years in the 14th century. The Netherlands was one of England's historical arch rivals, and so there's been plenty of invasions going in this direction
just right
across the 17th and 18th centuries.
There, so
in 1940, the British technically invaded and took over Iceland peacefully for a year in order to prevent it from falling into the hands of the Germans. But this was heavily protested by the Icelandic government at the time, so in my books, it still counts as an invasion. Italy, of course, was invaded by the British Army during the Second World War as well in 1943, but there were plenty of invasions before then, dating back to Richard the Lionheart's invasion in 1190. Germany, too, was obviously invaded by the British Army in 1945, and northwestern Germany was occupied by the British for 3 years until 1948. But a lot of German territory was ruled by Britain long before then. The islands of Heligoland were British for most of the 19th century, and the Kingdom of Hanover was effectively ruled under a personal union for over a century between 1714 and 1837. Austria was also invaded in 1945, and the southwest of the country was occupied for a decade. Norway was invaded in 1810 and 1812 during the Napoleonic Wars when it was a part of Denmark-Norway because Denmark was aligned to France, so obviously Denmark was invaded during that time as well. Finland, Estonia, and Latvia were all briefly invaded by small units during the Crimean War against Russia because they were all part of the Russian Empire at the time, and of course, Russia itself was invaded then too, as well as in 1918 when the British took over a large chunk of northern Russia for a time in their fight against the Bolsheviks. The territory of modern Ukraine was invaded by British Army units during the Crimean War. The British took over the Croatian island of Vis between 1807 and 1814 during their fight against Napoleon. The British Army had boots and guns on the ground in Bosnia recently between 1992 and 95 fighting against the Bosnian Serbs, and around the same time, the RAF also carried out bombing strikes against Serbian Serb targets in Serbia in 1999. Montenegro was briefly blockaded and invaded in 1913 during the First Balkan War. The British owned the westernmost Ionian islands of Greece between 1815 and 1863 before they gave them back, while Bulgaria was invaded and almost entirely occupied by the British Army between 1918 and 1919 at the end of World War I. Cyprus was a British protectorate between 1878 and 1914 when they decided to just outright annex it to piss off the Turks.
How are we only 4.5 minutes into this video? Wow. I don't even know what to say right now. Okay, I'm just going to continue.
And it remained annexed until 1960, except for 2 small chunks that are still British today. Turkey itself was massively invaded by the British during World War I, and part of it was occupied between 1919 and 1923. That wraps up Europe, so let's move on to Asia next. Modern-day Israel and Palestine, as well as Jordan, were British-controlled from the end of World War I to 1948 and 1946, respectively. Lebanon and Syria were both occupied from the Vichy French government briefly during World War II. Iraq was ruled between 1919 and 1932 and invaded again during the Second World War, and again in 1991, and again in 2003. Kuwait was a colony for over 60 years until 1966. Georgia and Azerbaijan were both invaded and occupied right at the end of World War I for a year. Iran has been invaded at least 3 times, with the most notable example being the joint Anglo-Soviet invasion of 1941. Turkmenistan was invaded in 1918 to prevent Bolshevik influence from spreading any further.
Wait, Turkmenistan? I've never heard of that place. Has that name changed? Wait, where's Turkey? I think we already talked about Turkey. So that's not Turkey. Turkey wouldn't be there anyway. Turkey be over, where's it at? Over here? I can't remember. But, okay.
Further, Afghanistan is a favorite British invasion spot since it's been invaded in 1839, 1878, 1919, and again in 2001. Qatar, Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, and Oman were all controlled by the British until the early 1970s, while a chunk...
Okay, I just want to point out, I think some of these aren't the same thing as kind of the invasions I'm picturing when he initially was talking about invasions. Because some of these are like joined with other forces like the U.S., I'm guessing, with the quote-unquote war on terror, stuff going on. I believe that is what the 2001 to 2014 Afghanistan was. I believe that's what the 1991 may have been them joining the U.S. during, Desert Storm. And then 2003 could have been probably Iraq. That's not Iran, it? Iraq. Yeah, excuse me. 2003. Okay, so some of these aren't the same as the initial, the idea I had of invasion is a little bit different than when that is an invasion. It is an invasion. It's just not the type. I don't know. I don't even know what to say. I don't really know what to say. I just continue.
of Yemen was controlled for over a century between 1839 and 1967. India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka were all, of course, invaded many times and outright ruled by the British Empire in parts for nearly 2 centuries between 1757 and...
That's what I was trying to get at. These invasions that took place kind of recently in like Afghanistan, you know, when it was probably about the war on terror stuff. It wasn't just the British invading to rule. They were invading with other forces, I believe, other nations' militaries to do something that they were all trying to do at the same time. You know, to me, what I thought he was going to do in invasions initially was just basically when England goes in to try to rule the country alone, not with other allies and stuff. You know what I'm saying? But it doesn't seem like that's total. But either way, even these countries that may have been invaded because of trying to fight something with allies, even before that, there were all these other invasions. So, and then these are obviously, wow. Okay.
In 1947, Nepal was invaded in 1814 but never successfully conquered. Bhutan was invaded in 1772 and again in 1864 and was sort of conquered as a protectorate between 1910 and 1948. Burma/Myanmar was invaded in 1826 and was definitely successfully conquered and ruled through 1947. Thailand was briefly invaded in 1945 since they were allied to Japan in World War II, and so was Vietnam in the same year, but that was to support the French government against the growing independence movement. Malaysia and Singapore were each conquered and ruled up until the 1950s and 1960s.
What?
Brunei was conquered and ruled up.
What? Hold on. Are you serious? England ruled Malaysia and Singapore for, I mean, 100, 150 years, or this was Malaysia almost 200 years? They ruled? What? And I'm just sitting here, I didn't even catch how long this was in India. Like, wow, that's crazy.
Until the 1980s, whereas the Philippines were briefly invaded during the 7 Years' War. China got invaded a lot, and Hong Kong was a colony until as recently as 1997. And while not outright invaded, part of Japan was occupied following World War II between 1946 and 1952. And finally, Indonesia was invaded a bunch during the Napoleonic Wars since it was...
So he just made a difference between, he just specified a difference between occupied and invaded, right? He was talking about Japan. So wouldn't you, when you go back to, where are we at? Hold on. Say Afghanistan, when this was part of the war on terror with the U.S., I'm guessing that's what that was. I'm not 100% sure, but I think that's what that was. Wouldn't you say that was more occupied and not invaded? I don't know. Because invaded seems to me you're talking about a country going in, trying to fully take over for reasons of its own, like to basically just take over a country and rule the country and kind of own the resources and everything there. I feel like when you go in with other allies to do a specific purpose, like the later wars and occupying a place because of World War II, that's not really the same thing as an invasion, really. I mean, it isn't, I don't know. I don't know. This is really hard for me to say if that was what I think of that. I don't know. Either way, this is insane.
Between 1946 and 1952. And finally, Indonesia was invaded a bunch during the Napoleonic Wars since it was a Dutch colony aligned to France at the time. Next up, Oceania. Australia and New Zealand, of course, were invaded by the British and established as colonies that each gained independence in 1931. Papua New Guinea was also a British colony for a time.
Australia was is this true? Australia was a British colony where basically prisoners were sent? I don't know where I've heard that from. And if that's true, is that also the same for New Zealand and Papua New Guinea?
These were the island countries of Fiji, Kiribati, the Solomon Islands, Tuvalu, and Vanuatu. Let's move back over to Africa next, which the British have violently visited a lot. In terms of just places the British outright colonized after invasions, there's the Gambia,
South
Sierra Leone,
Africa, I'm
Ghana,
guessing.
Nigeria, Egypt, Sudan, South Sudan, Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, Zambia, Malawi, Zimbabwe, Botswana, Namibia, and South Africa, along with parts of modern-day Somalia and Guinea. Senegal was briefly invaded and had some of their coastline taken over in the 1700s, while during the Second World War, the British invaded the French colonies of Djibouti, Madagascar, and Comoros after they aligned themselves with the Nazi Vichy regime, and the Italian colonies of Libya, Eritrea, and Ethiopia, although they had also invaded Ethiopia much earlier in 1868. And as German colonies right before World War I, the British also invaded Togo and Cameroon without annexing them afterwards. For the final area of the world left to discuss, let's move over to the Americas. All of Canada was a British colony until 1931, while Newfoundland remained until 1949. The United States, of course, was a colony until 1776, and was invaded again in 1812, and the modern states of Oregon and Washington were claimed right up until 1846. As far as other outright British colonies here go, there was the Bahamas, Jamaica, Belize, Grenada, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Barbados, St. Lucia, Dominica, Antigua and Barbuda, St. Kitts and Nevis, Trinidad and Tobago, and Guyana. Besides colonies, Cuba was invaded and occupied during the Seven Years' War in 1762. Haiti was invaded in 1793 during the French Revolutionary Wars. The Dominican Republic was invaded way back in 1655 in an attempt at conquest under Oliver Cromwell. Parts of the east coast of Honduras and Nicaragua were conquered and ruled for nearly 2 centuries until 1819. They sent the Navy to invade Mexico in 1861 to force them to repay some debts, and during the splendidly named War of Jenkins Ear, aka the more lame-sounding War of the Austrian Succession, the British invaded a lot of Spain's colonies, including Panama, a huge one into Colombia, and ultimately Peru. In 1796, the British took over Suriname because it was a Dutch colony, and they were allied with the revolutionary French and later Napoleon. They also invaded Martinique and Guadeloupe because they actually were French during the Napoleonic Wars. Venezuela was invaded in 1902 as part of the so-called Venezuela crisis to force the country to repay some debts they had defaulted on, kind of like Mexico, while Argentina and Uruguay were both invaded during the Napoleonic Wars as well in 1806 when Spain and her colonies were still allied with Napoleon. And that pretty much sums up all of the territory the British have ever ruled and all of the countries this small island has ever invaded. There are a total of 65 countries today who celebrate their independence days from the British Empire. The Empire used to rule over a quarter of all the world's land at the same time and was the biggest empire in human history.
Wow.
In total, today, there have been 117 modern countries that have been aggressively invaded by the British Armed Forces during some point in their histories, representing a total of 60% of all the world's nations, which is almost the same number of countries that you can watch this video in. YouTube is available in 130 countries now, or about 2/3 of them, but the algorithm that YouTube uses won't always work the way you think or want it to. It determines which videos succeed, which ones don't, and which ones you end up. So that's why a big group of my
Okay, that's wow, guys. That's insane. I've got to, let's see if I can pull this back here. I don't even know what to say. I mean, the thing is, not even all of the places that were invaded are shaded in red. Like you see all these, like if you shaded the rest of these in red, it would look even more crazy. You know, I don't even know what to say. That is, you know, I knew the British Empire was huge at one point, but, you know, and when, you know, I knew it was kind of all over the world, but at different points, but this puts it into perspective that at some point or another, England has invaded over half the world. Wow. I mean, obviously nowadays we don't believe in that type of conquest anymore. That was the way the game was played back then. The strong took over the weak, and the strong and you know what I mean? We don't do that anymore, but the fact that that was done, it's not something to be celebrated, obviously, but it's absolutely impressive that one tiny little dot, like one tiny little nation here, look at this place right here, right? Went and invaded the entire globe, basically. That's, when I say impressive, I don't mean that that's something that's obviously good. I'm saying, though, that is impressive how that was possible. It's amazing. Like, how in the world could one small nation be so powerful? That's just, and now I see why the Romans they don't even come close to this. Wow. I don't even know what to say. I'm kind of left speechless. I wasn't expecting this. What do you say? Hold on, let me go back just a minute. I want to see hold on.
And all of the countries this small island has ever invaded. There are a total of 65 countries today who celebrate their independence days from the British Empire. The Empire used to rule over a quarter of all the world's land at the same time and was the biggest empire in human history. And in total, today, there have been 117 modern countries that have been aggressively invaded by the British armed forces during some point in their history. So you can watch this.
Wow. 117 nations that are current nations have been invaded at some point by the British Army. They occupied 25% of the world at one time. That's insane. Wow. And 60 nations celebrate their independence from Britain. Wow. That is, wow. That's one of the reasons that, the British influence is everywhere you go. It really is. It really is. I mean, wow. Guys, I really don't know what to say. I'm at a loss for words. This was actually pretty shocking to me. I keep on saying the same thing over again because is that shocking to me because I didn't expect this. Wow. Okay. Well, I knew it was a lot, but I did not expect it was quite this big. When I think of 117 nations, I can't even remember, what do we have in the world? Isn't it like 200-ish nations total in the world? So over half the nations, if I'm not mistaken, have been invaded. So a quarter. Wow. Anyways, guys, I'm done repeating myself. But anyways, guys, thank you so much for stopping by. Please click that like button. Feel free to drop your comments and suggestions, and don't forget to subscribe to continue to follow me on my journey to discover my British and Irish ancestry. Until next time, guys, peace.